very much welcome to this session on global views of pension technology. And, we know that the pandemic has forced us to adopt technology solutions really quickly. And actually, it's great today because we have got panelists from all around the globe. So timing's a little bit awkward for some of them. So Adam from Australia, so it's 11 p.m. for him. Jodan in the US, 6 a.m. for him. Fahd in Dubai, 4 p.m. That's kind of okay. And then obviously I'm in London, so we know what time it is here. But isn't it great that we can bring together people, in this virtual conference and get their views on what's going on? So I have got some leading pensions technology experts to talk to you today, and they're going to be talking about what are the trends in each market, what types of improvements can schemes expect to see in the near and also the longer term. So I'm Emma Douglas, head of DC at LGIM, and I'm also chair of the PLSA policy board. And I'm joined by three great speakers. So I've got Jodan Ledford, the CEO of Smart USA. Now, Jodan used to be a colleague of mine in his role as Chief Client Officer for LGIM America, where he played a significant role in the growth and success of LGIM's US business. And I'm sure he'll be doing exactly the same for Smart. I've got Adam G, 11 o'clock at night, very good. I'm very impressed that Adam's here. Deputy CEO and Head of Strategy at Grow Super in Australia. So Adam has over 20 years of experience in the superannuation industry, and he works with many industry bodies, as well as having a regular slot on Sky Business. And last but definitely not least, I've got Fahd Rachidy, who is the founder and CEO of ABAKA. He's a serial entrepreneur with a focus on the use of artificial intelligence to improve member engagement and outcomes. So each speaker is going to talk to us for a maximum of 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. So please do send those in as we go along. And you can also tweet about the session using the hashtag PLSA Tech20. So just before we start, I'm going to ask you all a polling question. So if we can have that up on the screen, Jim, thank you very much. So which region or country do you think has the most advanced technology? So you can vote now. You can even put in others or more specific countries if you think we haven't been that specific. And, this is really a bit of a national contest going on here. I hope somebody votes for the UK. Okay, let's have a look. Oh yeah, Asia's racing ahead there. UK, thank you. A few people voting for the UK. That's great. Oh dear, US, nothing. That's not great, Joan. You're going to have to change your mind on that, definitely. Australia, yep, you got something in there, Adam, definitely. Yep. Europe's also making a play there, and others crept in as well. Okay, but Asia is the one that we think. So great that we haven't got a panelist from Asia, but I'm sure we can cover all of that as we discuss. So I think I would like to go on by just asking Jodan to kick us off with his presentation. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Emma. Hello, everyone from the US. It is 6 a.m. I'm Jodan Ledford, head of Smart USA, which is, going back to your polling question, it's a UK company that's bringing technology to the US. So I think that corroborates your view from there. If we just move to the next slide, I can get into the presentation. So Smart has probably a name in the UK that maybe has a bit more resonance than it does in the US. In the US, we are a brand new company, just launched earlier this year. But Smart in the UK is a technology firm that launched a master trust off the back of auto enrollment legislation in 2014. The founders of Smart came together and decided that in order to deliver for the small and medium enterprise market, really needed to be done from a technology perspective. So when you think about the master trust that they've developed over 5 years, that master trust has grown to over 75,000 plan sponsors and employers. And the only way that was going to be achievable was through technology. And what you expect from a modern technology firm administering a plan like that, or a master trust, is that actually it's focused really on the user experience. Everything that is developed and delivered through the platform is developed with the user in mind. If it doesn't pass user testing, it doesn't get put into the platform. And so from that perspective, unlike a lot of legacy pensions providers, at least in the US that I can speak of, when you log in, it's very difficult to actually see your balance or projected income in the future. SMART's developed from a technology forward perspective, and everything from the member perspective is front and center. So from that perspective, just given the sense that it was built from a cloud native, modern technology era, the ability to actually service down to the individual contractor level is quite different, quite advanced for the pensions industry, at least in the U.S. So if you move to the next slide, just focusing on the U.S. business. So SMART having that success in the UK, and then also seeing the transition across the globe to a predominantly DC coverage perspective for pensions versus the US legacy being a DB. As of now, over 60% of new money that comes into the market comes into the DC market. So when you think about the UK's master trust legislation, a lot of the other jurisdictions across the globe are moving to that direction, where it's looking at facilitating a DC pension solution for individuals. In the US, however, while we've had a bit of a head start with respect to DC, we really haven't done a great job with respect to covering all individuals. So as you can see, some of the statistics on this page, only 53% of employees at small employers have access to a DC plan. That results in about 38 million Americans do not have access to a retirement plan. And so this is the core issue of the future for the US. And so legislation passed, which I'll get into in a little bit, back at the end of last year, and future legislation that's coming forward is really looking at how do we service that small and medium enterprise market. And really historically, the cost to serve model for some of the large legacy providers in the US has actually made it somewhat cost prohibitive to service that part of the market, just given their legacy technology, their infrastructure issues. And so from that perspective, just based upon what the legislation is looking to achieve, a technology provider is actually well positioned to come in and actually serve that market. So because of the fact that we are, a standalone basis, just a 6-year-old company, and in the US, a brand new company, the way we found success across the globe at SMART is to partner with a lot of large entities who have, maybe more of a name brand on the front of their, the front of the shop window. So you can think about some of our strategic partners that we have. Emma Douglas from LGIM. We also partner with JP Morgan, Barclays, Lincoln Australia. And in the US, we'll be launching with a partner, which is unfortunately can't be named at this point in time, but will be named shortly. So when you think about coming through a partnership approach, we basically are providing effectively, the technology as the grout to a mosaic that's being delivered across any of the countries that we work in, or across any of the schemes and members that we work with as well. So if we move to the next section, I'll really get into the US market. It's I understand that presenting at a UK-based pensions conference, there probably is a lot of knowledge of the US market, but just in case, just to give a sense, it's a massive market. So if you look at the left-hand side, this just shows you the growth in the overall retirement market going back since 2010. So it's roughly a $30 trillion market comprised of different DB schemes, DC schemes, and individual retirement accounts. But if you really focus on the right-hand side, what you can see is that roughly about 8.86 trillion in US dollars at this point in time is focused in the DC market. Now there's a bunch of stuff at the bottom right that goes through different plan types, but really when you hear about the DC market in the US, you typically hear about the 401k plan. 401k is just actually an entry in the IRS ledger that created a savings plan back in the 70s. And over the 4 decades since it really was created, you saw a transition to the DC market over really accelerated since 2000. And a lot of that was just because there was a bit of a mismanagement of DB assets in the US. And so employers saw that they could shift to a DC type scheme where they could invest along the way with the participant, and then at retirement allow the participant to do what they need to do. So if we move to the next slide. So with that as context, I just wanted to get a good sense of what we're really trying to achieve and what legislation is facilitating. So legislation in the US, is a huge catalyst for lots of different changes in the retirement market. A lot of people ask, in the UK, when you have the auto enrollment legislation and you have mandatory plan adoption from employers who needed to provide a DC scheme to their employees, and then you look in the US, where we do everything on a tax incentive basis, people start asking the question of how legislation is impactful. And so what I wanted to give you a sense of is what the legislation was that passed at the end of last year, why that's going to be a catalyst for technology, innovation and change, and then also give you a sense of what prior legislation has done. So the entire DC market in the US, for the most part, was founded by a piece of legislation back in 1970 called ERISA. There's been a huge patchwork quilt of changes to that legislation over time. And the last two, the most recent legislation for both DC and DB came in a series of two different pieces of legislation. So in 2006, there was the Pension Protection Act, and in 2019, there's the Secure Act. So the most recent legislation, the Secure Act, is really focused on two things. It's focused on closing the coverage gap in the US, so that 53% uncovered employees, which is shown on the bottom right with that graph, is really the key focus, because at the small end of the market, effectively administering a plan or offering a plan has been historically too cost prohibitive. The second aspect it was looking to tackle is facilitate greater adoption of retirement income within DC plans. In the US, it's interesting, despite being called a retirement plan, the DC 401k was actually not really designed to be a retirement plan. So typically what happens at this point in time is people will participate in a DC scheme up until retirement, and then they will roll out, that's what the term is called, either to an IRA, or they'll roll out and cash out and go to a financial advised option. So the US legislators understand that basically they're going from a solution that they get from an institutional solution of roughly a handful of basis points to going to 200 to 300 basis point solutions. So they're also looking to facilitate the greater adoption of retirement income. This is the most substantial piece of legislation since the PPA in 2006. And the reason why I put that in here is just to give you a sense of how much legislation impacts the market. Prior to 2006, target date funds in the US had roughly 127 billion in assets. And then the PPA of 2006 established that target date funds could become a suitable default solution for employees to be defaulted into. So that led to the rise of the target date fund market, the rise of Vanguard, T. Rowe, Fidelity, and it took the market from 127 billion to over 2 trillion in a little over 12 years. So you can see that the legislation in the US has a huge effect, even if it isn't mandatory from that perspective. If we move up to the next slide, the coverage gap, and I need to speed up, I understand, is just giving you a sense of here's the real issue. Effectively in the US, and this is data that comes from Employee Benefits Research Institute, roughly 71% of people who have access to a retirement plan have over 50,000 in savings, versus 75% of those that don't have access have less than 10,000 in retirement savings when they get there. So that coverage gap is really not only providing access, but it shows you why it's so beneficial, because those that have access to a retirement plan have a lot better opportunity to spend through retirement. So speeding up, we'll move to the next slide so I can keep going. So this gives you a sense of a little bit of the market structure, but really the small plan market is focused. There's about 580,000 plans in the US. The majority of those, 525,000, are focused in the micro plan level, so under the 5 million amount. So when you start thinking about that coverage gap, and we said that there's 53% of people don't have access, what it really means is that over the next 5 years, you could expect something close to 400,000 plans to be created through this legislation, leading to upwards of 200 billion in the next 5 years, but over time could be an additional $1 trillion of assets that are brought into the marketplace. And so, how do you think about actually closing that gap? Well, you need to be able to do it in a way that provides a lot of economies of scale. And so what the Secure Act did was create effectively the master trust structure in the US called a pooled employer plan, which allows any company, irrespective of their purpose, which is previously what you had to have was a common purpose to come together in a single plan. Any company can come together into a pooled employer plan. And over time, what you're going to see is effectively the rise of what looks like a superannuation fund. So it just gives you a sense of what the impact can be. So if you move on to the next slide, what you'll see is this is where technology really starts to enter the fray. So when you think about the fact that we're looking at onboarding another 400,000 plans, which over the history of the last 50 years, there's only been 580,000 plans created in the US, what you realize is that the legacy infrastructure is not going to be able to handle it. So what SMART's doing in the US is coming in and offering a pooled employer plan, very similar to the master trust structure that was created in the UK. And it's looking to onboard lots of small employers over the next 5 to 10 years, working with large intermediaries in the US. And the reason they're able to do that is because of the cost to serve model based upon the technology being cloud-based, fully payroll integrated, less than 60 minutes to sign up a scheme, less than a week to administer a scheme and ongoing. Plus the fact that the legislation itself is providing a lot of coverage with respect to administrative costs for schemes. And what you're going to see is a large proliferation of new schemes, as well as a large consolidation over time as the economies of scale of those pooled employer plans offer better benefits to even the small and mid-sized plan market. In addition, we mentioned that the retirement income solution is vastly needed in the U.S. And what you can see is that Smart Retire has been developed in the U.S. and the U.K. as well to develop outcomes with respect to retirement income. I will just say that, you know, over time, the difference between the DB and the DC scheme outcome is that a DB plan tells you exactly what you're going to get through retirement, and DC scheme leaves you with a big pot of money. And so what Smart Retire is looking to achieve is to help you take that pot of money and turn it into separate and distinct income journeys to help you with early retirement spending, later life spending, and then keep some savings objectives. So if we move along to the next slide, this just gives you a sense of how it's done from technology. It's really driven through an API framework where we have a pooled employer plan that allows the employee, the employer, the advisor, and the back-end platform to be administered via a portal that is integrated through APIs through all of the different downstream providers, from those providing payroll to those putting instructions to investments, and it's all bundled into one platform that's being rolled out not only in the UK, but in the US, Dubai, Ireland, and eventually in Australia as well. So it truly is a global technology solution. I think if you just move the last slide real quickly, and I know I'm up against time, Smart Retire, this just gives you a sense of exactly what I said. It's developing a solution also for technology to help people conceptualize retirement income and be able to do it in a way that is intuitive, easy, and allows them to actually provide themselves for a better retirement outcome at a more reasonable cost than going to a 200 or 300 basis point advised market. So I kind of sped up there at the end. I apologize, but I was running late. So I'll turn it back over to Emma and look forward to the questions at the end.
Thanks, Jodan. Appreciate the speedy close there. And yeah, please do ask questions of Jodan for some of those later slides. I'm sure we'll have plenty. And now I'm going to hand over from the 6 a.m. slot to the 11 p.m. slot. So Adam, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. And look, thanks for the opportunity to present today. It is late at night here, but no, always willing to share our story. So if we can flick to the next slide. So Grow was basically initially established as a superannuation fund, and we built what was originally going to be the Google Maps of Australian superannuation. So the Australian super industry is quite well developed. You know, we were a cottage industry probably 10 to 15 years ago with, you know, upwards of 1,000 superannuation funds. That's shrunk down to, you know, closer to 200 these days, and now sort of significant scale. So Australian super, you know, is nearing 200 billion in FUM, you know, down to some of the smallest superannuation funds, which is still running at sort of 500 mil to a billion, but they are certainly some of the smaller funds in the industry these days. So we came to market with an app and an online superannuation fund. It was basically designed to try and engage members and help them make an informed journey around, an informed decision around how they could maximise their retirement income. So, you know, providing calculators, providing, you know, tips on if you make contributions at a certain age, this is how you could get to a certain balance at the end of the day. But the real challenge that we found with this solution was that we had captured all the information at the front end on the member app, but we would still have to pass that to an administrator in the back end. So the real challenge that we found, though, was that the legacy technology really prohibited us from plugging in the necessary information that we wanted to, and the errors that were coming back. You know, we would have 10,000 members join over a single month when we set up. We would send all that information through to our administrator. Our administrator would come back to us, and we'd end up with 10,000 members with the same member number. So we couldn't run any data analytics. You know, the administrator forgot to invest 3/4 of the FUM for a month. So we had, you know, significant loss of investment returns, which when you're running an online business with highly engaged members is particularly challenging to explain. So through necessity and not being able to find another provider that could really provide the solution we were looking for, we decided to pivot the business. So 2 years ago, we decided, why don't we go and build our own registry platform? You know, how hard could that be? I didn't have any grey hair when we started, and look at me now. But it has been a fascinating journey. I think it's fair to say, you know, the UK is probably similar in terms of some of the participants that you have in the market there. So we have the Bravuras of the world, Obviously, Link and Mercer are the two key providers within Australia in terms of the technology. But if you look at the Bravura solutions, some of the Link solutions that they are using, ignoring the deal they've done with Smart Pension, that technology was built in the 1980s. Link's technology was built in the late 1990s. Iris is a big player here as well. Similarly, 1990s technology. So when you're looking to do different things, like plug in through APIs or pull real-time data out of back-end platforms, that becomes particularly challenging when your API is like running a 12-lane freeway into a 1-lane street and you can't get that information out. So if we can flick to the next slide. We decided that we would use distributed ledger technology, and we are certainly the first one in Australia to do that. I am still yet to hear of anyone that's using distributed ledger technology to provide pension fund administration. Obviously, there's a lot of work around the unit trusts and managed funds that are starting to use distributed ledger. But there are some significant benefits associated with the use of a distributed ledger. So it is blockchain. It's not cryptocurrency. We're not mining Bitcoin, but we are using effectively what is a system that provides a single source of truth for all of the actors in a superannuation funds ecosystem, as I've got there. In addition to that, it's all cloud-based, our platform, and we use a range of APIs at the core of the platform, which means we can push and pull data and integrate into a range of different providers. The technology that exists in Australia for some of the older participants, they just can't push data in and out through APIs because the technology is still using overnight batch processes, which makes real-time data pushes very, very difficult. So if we can flick to the next slide, the reason that we used distributed ledger and where there is a real use case for it is within Australia, and I'm guessing it's not much different to what we see in the UK and the US, and certainly very similar to what we've seen in Asia. A fund has an ecosystem whereby they use 4 or 5 different providers to offer their solution to their members. They obviously have the fund themselves, they have an administrator, they have an insurer, they have a custodian, they have a range of investment managers that obviously invest the money for them. What we find is obviously each of the participants or the actors in that ecosystem uses their own data. So they use their own database. There is no single source of truth across each of those participants. And what you end up finding is you have significant errors, you have fat fingers passing information through that somehow error, and you have real challenges around the use of real-time data because you may only report to the insurer on a monthly basis around the number of new members and the insurance levels that they may have. The beauty of the distributed ledger is we can use a single system to provide information to all of those parties. So again, if we can flick to the next slide. This is the end state, if I can say. So what we effectively have within the distributed ledger is as soon as, for example, a member joins a fund, and I've got REST here, which is a sort of 2 million member fund, about 50 or 60 billion in funds under management. In real time, the information gets provided to the administrator, to the insurer. The custodian will get a record of the member's investment choice and where their money is sitting. In addition to that, we're having some interesting discussions here with the ASX, which is obviously our stock exchange, around the ability to push and pull data in real time, given they are also doing a large project around distributed ledger. We also have a view within Australia at the moment that the regulator, APRA, currently receives sort of quarterly reporting from superannuation funds. Most of that is manual, done through a horrible portal that most funds detest providing that information because it is highly manual. When we use the distributed ledger system, we can actually establish APRA as a node on the platform, and they can then have read-only access into any of that information that the superannuation fund might send. So we could get to a point, certainly not immediately, where we provide sort of real-time APRA reporting to the regulators to ensure that they're very much across everything that the superannuation fund is doing. The other beauty of these sorts of operations is you get significant efficiencies because every one of those participants is operating off this single source of truth. We can pass information in real time. So the custodian can pass information, unit pricing in real time back to the administrator, and that can be passed in an API so that there isn't that fat finger challenge where someone has keyed in a number incorrectly. That information can come directly out of the system. So significant efficiency gains. as well as additional security, because to hack a distributed ledger, you effectively have to hack every node at the same time. So it becomes much more difficult to protect against or to be challenged against cyber. It's certainly not foolproof completely, but it does create some significant benefits around cyber. If we could go to the next one, please. The other beauty of our operating model is we don't believe we can do everything spectacularly well. And I think that is very different to what we see in the current environment within Australian superannuation. Most administration providers currently provide the bums on seats administration. They provide the technology, they provide a call centre, they provide a mail house. Many of them are trying to provide a CRM, a data analytics solution. They might provide an online advice tool, etc., etc. Our view is we would far prefer to integrate with best of breed providers using the technologies and the APIs to then offer funds best in breed services. So our offering is modular, meaning that funds can select any of the providers that they would like to choose rather than being limited to a specific provider's offering. So if we can flick to the next slide. This is what we see the ecosystem. So TINA is our distributed ledger platform. I won't go into why it's called TINA, but it may have something to do with a singer called Tina Arena who had a song Chains, and obviously blockchain somehow relates to that. This is what happens when you get developers naming platforms. But what we see is we have a range of best in breed providers that plug into that ecosystem. So if a fund decides that they want to use their own CRM, they can choose from Microsoft Dynamics, they can use Salesforce, they can use their own, and we plug straight into it. Similarly, if they have their own advice technology, we plug in. If they don't have anything, we'll provide something best of breed, and they can pick and choose what they want at any time. If they want to in-house their call center at some stage, it provides that flexibility. And that is very different to what we're seeing in Australia currently, whereby it is very much a closed ecosystem. And that's really why we ended up building the TINA platform, because we couldn't plug into any of the existing platforms. So to close, if we can go to the final one, we do believe that our technology and our offering is very different to what's seen in the market these days. Our view is that funds should control their own ecosystem and their operating model going forward. We should not dictate what technologies they can use and who they can plug into, and that's certainly very different to the current model. The technology allows us to operate a true exceptions-based admin model. So we think we need about 40% of the backsides on seats to be doing processing. And obviously that results in significant cost savings. So we're generally around 30 to 40% less in terms of cost than the incumbent providers. The beauty of distributed ledger is we do configuration, not build. So when there is a regulatory change, we make it once at the top of the platform and it flows down automatically. The challenge we see within some of these platforms is you have a separate instance for every single fund, so you make a regulatory change 50 times. Horribly expensive, horribly inefficient. And finally, obviously, as I mentioned before, our ecosystem lets funds choose the best of breed providers across the industry, which means they can then tailor their outcomes and the products and services they deliver to their members. That is it from me. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Great, Adam. Thank you so much for that. I mean, we hear so much about blockchain, but it's really interesting to actually understand, certainly for me, a bit more about how that could actually work and how it is working for you in Australia. Yeah, fantastic stuff. So I think we've got another polling question coming up, everybody. So here you go. This is quite a controversial one. Would you share your own data if it gave you a better retirement income? So yes, no, or not sure. So data sharing, obviously quite a big topic. It's a really interesting one, I think, here. I don't know quite what I would answer, actually. That really is a hard one. I would like a better retirement income, but would I want to share my data? Yeah, I can see this being quite a mixed view. Let's see. Yes, it is quite a mixed view, but actually quite a lot are saying yes. So wow, nearly 60% are going for yes. Quite a lot are probably in my camp of the not sure, and not so many are saying no. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. And that might help you, Fahd, in some of the discussions that you're going to just take us through on just a minute. So over to you.
Absolutely, Emma. Thank you. And yes, it's basically, very interesting to see the result of that poll, and we do see similar results across different markets. And I think it's really important, and particularly when we are talking about solutions where we want to leverage member data to create better member engagement and build and improve member outcome. That's highlighting a value proposition to individuals, build that trust and that confidence into providers, into the technology that are used, and people are keen to share their data. I think there is a lot of buzz around words like AI and blockchain. Both of them rely on data, and the fuel of those technologies data. So of course, it's a critical aspect here to be able to create that trust and bring forward a strong value proposition. And you can see that the result is generally people are happy to share their information if they can see the value of it. So if you could move, please, to the next slide, Jim, thank you. But first of all, let's take a bit of a step back. I know that when you pronounce the word artificial intelligence, people get scared, but in fact they don't realize probably that they use it now all the time just by opening their smartphone. But want to explain a little bit more here how it works. And basically, machine learning specifically, which is a subset of AI, is really a technology where the machine can learn from data by itself, pretty much, and can basically identify patterns, learn from it, and provide interesting results in terms of the predictive capabilities of the technology, which here in our industry can actually be leveraged to create a much higher member engagement and to be able to understand what are people's immediate needs or short-term needs and how can we increase engagement. So obviously those technology are founded on the basis that you can get access to that data. And of course you need to be sure when you leverage similar platforms and such a technology that this is going to be compliant with the regulations around data privacy. This is going to be respecting, maybe it's not in the regulation, but at least the ethics of how do we use data and how can we leverage it to serve our customers. And I think we are at a point today in the industry where we can see those solutions being used and deployed. We work with large organizations in different markets, and it's a really exciting journey to see how this new technology can be deployed and utilized. So if we move to the next slide, we can highlight here a few examples, a few applications, and really the challenge is on one hand, to create that engagement and identify how we can answer the need for digital services and retirement and insurance, generally speaking, is not exempt from that trend. So of course, people want to have now all of their solutions and most of their experiences online. And you can see that the share of digital and hybrid advice customer, for example, in the past few years has massively increased. This was actually 2019. So you can imagine post-global pandemic in 2020, how that number has just increased. And we can also see that the some of the products that are where AI is applied, such as AI-powered chatbot, is hugely powerful and used now in the industry. And with very simple objectives, really, and very simple applications, which is, to create that engagement, to activate members, and to be able to understand what are the individuals that are interested in which product, when, what are their challenges, are we able to tailor and curate offerings and experiences to those users. And of course, if you're comparing to other industries, most people today would be using Netflix. So the more you use Netflix, the system will collect information and data on the users and be able to recommend relevant movies or TV series. And that's a great experience because, you don't want to spend hours there scrolling for the movie that you would like to have, and they have thousands of them. If you're purchasing the goods and services on Amazon Prime, then same story. It's a huge platform and ecosystem, and you can see that by nudging users, by understanding what are their immediate interests, you actually create a much higher engagement and an outstanding experience. And so we are able to do that today in the industry. And I think, it is time that we collectively provide experience, because then we can be able to help people like my dad, who never had a pension because they are disengaged, because we haven't saved enough, because, we always postpone that decision. And it's becoming a huge socioeconomic challenge for developed countries, where the retirement gap is just growing and growing, and people are not saving enough. People are living longer, and of course that means that the need for being able to build a secure financial future has just increased. And what we see is, by applying solutions that are able to deliver a personal, relevant, and timely experience with members, we are actually able to have an impact there. So if you could move to the next slide here, please, then I'll explain a little bit more how at ABAKA we use artificial intelligence to help our clients build that experience and create that engagement with their members, with their customers. So on one hand, there's one solution which is basically extremely powerful in the ability to better understand users, better understand members. So extracting and analyzing individuals' data and be able, by applying machine learning models, to predict and deliver a relevant next best action for that member. So am I interested to save for retirement? If so, what are the immediate action I can take to achieve my retirement goal? Am I actually not interested in your retirement goal, but more interested in saving for a rainy day fund, for example? Am I interested to protect my family and get some insurance product there to help me achieve that goal, etc., etc. So by actually being able to analyze those data points and capture additional data points on those members, which include behavioral data, social data, emotional data, you're actually able to create that predictive engagement. And on the other hand, we have developed the conversational AI chatbot. So this AI-powered chatbot is basically your financial assistant, which create that engagement with members. And this is deployed today with clients across the globe, different markets, different jurisdiction, with a very interesting success in terms of engagement and positive outcome. I just want to finish with the last slide, please, before we move on. And that's a quick summary on what are the challenges that the industry is facing today. So on the left-hand side, we all have those challenges around having a broken experience and siloed customer journeys across different verticals. Across a large organization, you're going to have one vertical dealing with personal investing, one vertical dealing with retirement, one vertical dealing with insurance, etc. So how can we bring all of that together in a customer-centric ecosystem to be able to deliver an entire life journey? And that is really, in our opinion, the key to create that engagement. So instead of just looking at one pension pot, can we expand that view? Can we expand that experience across a much broader range of interests, products, services, goals, etc., to actually drive that experience. And of course, that means a lot of more data point, and of course, that means utilizing AI there will be extremely powerful to achieve that goal.
Great, thank you so much, Fahd, for that. Thank you. Right, we do have some questions coming in and a small amount of time for questions. So perhaps if we can be very quick on our answers. So I'll actually just go to the bottom one, which came in from Paul. So I often find this myself, with many industries, obviously consumers are engaging on a very regular basis with the technology, but in pensions, they're not necessarily, they might be looking at it once or twice a year. So does tech work as well in this scenario? I'm sure all three of the panelists have got views on that question. Who would like to go first? I'll go to you, Fahd, first.
So I think the challenge, I would start by our initial point, which is on this poll. How do we first highlight the value proposition? How do we first highlight what would be of interest and what is the value proposition that can be brought to a member before we talk about the technology, before we talk about the solutions and the product? And I think by achieving and being able to bring that value proposition will have an impact, and we can create that experience with members. And so, yeah.
I'd say it absolutely enhances the participation and engagement with retirement. I mean, people are used to, holding up their, engaging with their phones in a way that's so native to them now that if they can have experience like that with retirement, it's only going to lead to better outcomes. And so we're seeing that with the Smart platform in the UK. We're going to be launching in the US, but the analytics aspect and just capturing the participant behavior and the design of the platform to further engage participants is exactly what we think the future is going to be, because otherwise, we're failing ourselves if we're not helping people, achieve their best retirement outcome from having an intuitive path with technology.
Thanks, Jodan. Adam?
Look, I'd agree with, I think, both Fahd and Jodan. I think that the challenge is obviously too much engagement that isn't targeted, I think only upsets members. So making sure that you are providing, the snippets of information that they need as and when they need them, using those data analytics capabilities is critical. Just sending spam emails every month, asking for more information or doing things is not going to get the right outcome that you need. But providing targeted information with calculators and tools to enable them to engage with the fund is absolutely critical to maximising retirement outcomes.
Great, thanks. I'll pick another question up here, which is our poll showed that everyone thought that, the majority of people thought that Asia perhaps was the region that was ahead in technology. Why do we think they always do seem to be perceived, at least, as ahead of the rest of the world? Got some views on that, panelists?
I can give you a few examples. We're actually announcing a big launch with a client in the region in December in Singapore and Hong Kong. And I think there are two aspects, data and AI, where we see basically a huge take on by the industry on those technology. There is a much higher penetration of mobile adoption of the, a much more friendlier approach also from the regulator in terms of adopting those new technologies, and also, a lot more competition, I'd say, not only by the existing and so-called incumbents and providers, but also by new platforms and new entrants. You've got huge, market shares from platforms such as Grab, WeChat, and Financial, and you can find retirement product, insurance products, savings products, anything basically on those platforms, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the industry, which basically in turn accelerate adoption for those technologies.
Thanks, Fahd. And we've probably got time for just one more question if we answer it really quickly. So I'll just pick the one that's coming from Joe, which is the healthy competition in the tech space in the US and Australia for pensions administration. So just to Jodan and Adam, just for your quick views on that one, thanks.
Yes, so there's a healthy competition, but I think the difference is that the legislation that I mentioned on the Secure Act, prior to that, a lot of the technology providers were looking for a direct to plan sponsor solution, whereas the platform that's effectively created from the legislation gives more a bit of head start because of the master trust market in the UK. So I think you see some healthy competition. I just think it wasn't built for what the legislation is providing.
And I think from an Australian perspective, we've had a duopoly, is the honest truth, over the last 5 years, but there is some new entrants entering the market now that will provide more healthy competition. I think, again, the challenge is some of the technology is still quite legacy. And the margins are tight, there's no doubt about that. So, but there is competition and it is increasing.
That's great. Well, I would like to thank all the panelists for that great discussion. So, we did AI, blockchain, legislation, driving change, and we didn't even really touch on technology powering decumulation. We've mentioned it throughout the presentations, but that's probably a whole other topic. Sorry I didn't get around to answering all the questions, but thank you so much, panelists, for a really great session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.